Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for Ohio. Let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for you know who. Wanna go, gonna glow.
Aloha, and welcome back to another episode of the Ahana Packers Edition podcast. The podcast where we are we are previewing the O-line position in the 2025 draft class, but free agent and trade news is dropping all around us, so we're gonna springboard into that side of it. Before I do, though, Iowa Joe is back with me again today. Unfortunately, we have no guests. No one wanted this O-line class. I hope that's not
That's the
harbinger of
truth.
things to come. But Joe, there's several names that were on the wish list of many Packers fans who will not be coming to Green Bay given recent events. I guess at the top of the list, we'll start with there will be no reunion with Devontae Adams. He is signing with LA. It always seemed a little hopeful, but at the same time, there was still decent connections with Tay. But in the end, he stuck to his guns that he wanted to go back to the West Coast. He signs with the Rams, and it's like a 2-year, I think 46 or something like that, $1 million deal.
26 guaranteed.
Haven't seen any corroboration of whether Green Bay was involved or not. Honestly, this is all
Not
happened.
a 26 mil guarantee.
Yeah. So,
and then we got some breaking right now. According to Schefter, I see on Reddit that they're quoting Schefter. DK's going to to Pittsburgh, the Steelers.
Yep. So that one's off the table too. And on top of it, not just he's going to Pittsburgh, it's a second round pick going back to Seattle. But on top of it, they're paying him $150. Not sure about the guaranteed money on that one. But while I was more on board with the idea of DK than, say, like T. Higgins, still not really feeling paying a guy $150 million to figure out that he is not a wide receiver one. DK is like, he'd be a really nice piece to this offense, but I think what people fail to recognize a lot is there's a difference between being a top threat and a wide receiver one. And DK is really good at what he does, but he is not that guy who's going to be number one on the call sheet, face the top corner on the other team, produce every week, and still force a shade or even a double team to an extent. He's still limited as a route runner. He kind of had the yips last year to an extent. And, it's sort of interesting to see that he ended up in Pittsburgh, who, they have a decent front office.
No quarterback.
Yeah, but I believe that he listed that he wanted warm weather, check. Stable quarterback situation, check. And I forget what the third one was because the first two are making me laugh. So
$30 million a year.
Yeah, so I guess he got one of them.
Yeah, he got $33 million a year.
Yeah, so he, like I said, someone else can pay that bill, foot that bill to figure out, what he is or isn't. I do agree that Green Bay still.
I honestly,
go for it.
I really think that his hope was he was going to end up with the Rams. And when the Rams decided that they weren't going to pay that kind of money out for DK and also give up a second-round pick for him, I really think they just moved on to the next. And I honestly think that's the same thing the Packers did. I will fully believe the Packers were in on him because I know Gutekunst has said in the past that he's going to do his due diligence on everything. But I think when it came down to it that they were going to have to give up a second-round pick and a 5-year, $150 million contract, they said, no way, we're not paying that. And I agree with you on DK. I think he's still living off a lot of his pre-draft hype, even though he's been in the league for, 4 years now. I think a lot of people are living up to his pre-draft hype where it was, oh my God, he's an athletic freak. There's like 0.1% body fat on him and, all this other stuff. And for as much as that is true, I don't think he's ever lived up to what people expected him to be. But his draft stock is still fresh in mind for a lot of people. And of course, he's got the big name to him. Oh my God, it's DK Metcalf. It's DK Metcalf. We got to get him. We got to get him. I think the Packers are going to make a deal at some point with some kind of wide receiver. And then, of course, they're going to draft one. My hope is still that they're going to take one in the first round. I think this would be the year to friggin' do it because, as you said earlier, this OT class is not really, or this offensive line period is not really a solid one. I mean, there's some pieces in there, but there are a lot of work need to be done with them.
Yeah,
And the only two, or the only real position that I've seen so far that is top notch, and I know a lot of people are going to throw corner out there, and corner is not bad, but I think even wide receiver outdoes what corner does, and there's going to be a lot of guys out there that it just didn't. This year makes so much sense.
no, totally agree. You know, the name out there, if you're looking for like a wide receiver one who weirdly hasn't gotten a lot of news in the circles, is Amari Cooper is still out there. He's still only 30, which is a little odd because it feels like he's been around for forever at this point. Um, there's still some speed guys out there in free agency, so you can go that route as well because the draft doesn't really have
And
those
you know,
types.
they're working the trade market. You never know what kind of trade that Goody's going to be able to pull off and get somebody in here.
Yep.
I hate to say it, that they can also dangle Malik Willis out there as a trade piece, and I think some of these QB hungry teams would be all right. Yeah, sure. We'll give this guy a shot. You throw us, you know, Malik Willis and a lower draft pick for some name. I think they said that even Rashad Bateman was possible as a trade piece from the Ravens. So that would be somebody that they could look into.
Yeah.
But
So yeah, it's 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 whatever. People are gonna be mad. People are gonna be okay with it, and wherever you fall into that, we love you guys all anyway. But on top of that, on the other side of the ball in free agency, two trades that will definitely not be happening are basically the top two edge guys in the NFL, between Miles Garrett and Max Crosby, both signing buku bucks extensions with their current teams. I think Garrett's deal basically averages 40 million a season. Crosby's is somewhere in like the 36 or 37 per year. Those guys are staying put. There's still a lot of guys on the free agent market that Green Bay can go after, but it
and
was always
Hendrickson is still out there as a
yep,
possible trade
yep.
piece.
And that one, I'm pretty sure that bridge is pretty well burnt from both ends. So that move will probably happen sooner than later in terms of them moving on because Cleveland or Cincy doesn't want to lose him for nothing. But um, the Crosby and Garrett ones, they were fun pipe dreams, but they weren't ever really more than that because what you were going to have to send back to get them out of those situations was, I know a lot of people say it should be doable for Green Bay, but it's just really funny seeing the people who say those things are the same ones that are like, this roster lacks so much talent, elite talent, blah blah blah, and um, they need help at six different positions, and oh, but at the same time, trading, sending out four picks for one guy, that's the way to do it, kind of thing. And it's like,
And
and I'm not here
Gutekunst,
to argue that a fifth, a sixth, a first, and a second round pick are going to be better players than Miles Garrett, but the mental gymnastics some people do to like justify points on either side of where this team are, it like I said, it makes me laugh. I don't even reply to most of them anymore because I'm like, you're so set in your way, in your fantasy way, that no amount of good-hearted discussion is going to change that, and so you just stay wherever you are. But I do find it funny when you like, if you really pay attention to who says certain things, a lot of the time it's the same people that are making wild arguments on either end of the spectrum, and it's like, okay, like, which side of the fence are you sitting on today?
and the thing is there's too many people out there playing fantasy football and Madden and all that stuff that think it's just so simple. Hey, we'll just throw them this offer here. It worked over there, so it should work here too. Well, that's not how real life works. A GM with a great player is not just going to give them up for pennies. They're going to try getting the look at what the Packers got for both Devontae and Aaron Rodgers. It's not like they gave them up for nothing. They
And
got legit.
supposedly those were the only teams those guys were going to go to.
Yeah. So, they got good pieces back for it. So yeah, I never believed the Miles Garrett one just because I thought it was going to be there was too much there for it, especially with him being on the other side of 30. The Max Crosby one was interesting just because it seemed like uh the Raiders were in a spot where maybe they were going to blow up their team, but now they traded for 35-year-old Geno Smith, and they re-signed Crosby and all that. I honestly thought maybe DK was going to end up down there too because of the whole warm weather and quarterback and stuff like that. But, whatever. Like I said, Goody is going to do what he can do. But here's the thing Gutekunst is also one of those guys that likes to collect draft picks. And he has said multiple times he would love to have more draft picks. He always wants more draft picks. The Packers are light on draft picks this year compared in past years. So the likelihood of them packaging multiple picks from this year is almost nil. So yeah, I don't see it happening. I don't see I mean, I can see them doing like a Malik trade where they trade a seventh rounder for a guy that maybe isn't doing well on his current team, or maybe trading a player for player type deal. But I don't fully expect them to go into. I know Goody said at his press conference that he wasn't going to let where the draft is taking place stop him from making moves, but I just cannot see him trading a first round pick without having an extra first round pick when the draft is in Green Bay with so many Packer fans around.
And on that note, let's focus in on the topic of this episode, which is O line. And
We have to.
so, as we stick to the script that we've been running with the last few weeks, so if you look at it, the main outgoing guy is Josh Myers, and I do believe at this point he is probably gone in free agency. I think the only reason he'd be back is if we go through, we're hitting the end of March. He's getting no real calls. He kind of comes back to Green Bay and is like, hey, like, I've got no interest. Like, is there still a spot for me if I come back, kind of thing. And I don't know what the discussions would be in the front office. I'm of the mindset, I hope they're ready to move on. I think they've seen the best that they're going to see from Myers at this point. I think both sides just need a fresh start at the position. Well, I think Myers just needs a fresh start on his own. And I think the Packers need to just go in another direction at this point. But, depending, and that's what makes their situation on the O line so funky is because Myers going out, hypothetically, you're set at left tackle, left guard, right tackle going into the season. But with Myers going out, the center position being potentially vacant or being vacant in that scenario, there's a multitude of options that they have in how to replace that, replace Myers' starting spot. If he's ready, Jacob Monk seems like a guy that the team is, would like to go. You can move Elton over. Tom moving over is still not out of the option, and even Ryan isn't out of the discussion as either as the center. I kind of honestly would like to see Morgan play center if they've trained him up or anything. But I think they're gonna move Elton over because they want Morgan to start. But I don't expect to see too much in free agency either. Again, it's not a great class, and if anything, I expect them to sign someone like how they brought in Dillard, where it's a guy who can, battle to be your swing tackle and, start a couple games if you have to, if you need him to. But other than that, I don't see them add maybe some guard depth, but otherwise, I don't see too much happening on that front in free agency.
There's a couple of guys that I wouldn't mind bringing in. I just had their names. Shit. James Daniels. Why couldn't I think of it? Friggin' Iowa guy. He played more in college. He played center, and I think that's what he was originally drafted as, was center. But they kind of shifted him to guard because I think at the time that they drafted him, they had an established center, so I think they wanted to play him at guard more. Still only 27 going on 28, so there's a little bit left there. Uh, there was one other one that I kind of thought of because I think right now it's all about depth. Like you
Yeah.
said, we can tell what the starting line is going to be pretty well, but it's the depth pieces that we're kind of missing out on. So maybe a guy like Dylan Radins, that's coming out of Tennessee. There was one other guy that I was looking at with Daniels, Patrick McCarry from Baltimore. That one seems to be a pretty big name that I've heard thrown around a lot in the inner circles that could play guard. So there are guys. It's just, you know, we can sit here and say the whole line is pretty well set, but what do the Packers think about it? Do they
Yeah.
think they need to bring in a? My whole thing is I think Morgan will go to left guard. More than likely, Elton will go to center because that's how we saw when Myers was getting hurt. What happened? So I see that happening more than not. So at that point, your line is pretty well set. Now you've got to worry about your depth, and that's what is not looking great right now. So they still got Dillard listed, but I think he's a free agent right now. So it'd be because the technical first the season hasn't started yet.
Yeah.
So I believe he'll be a free agent. So they've still got Glover and Telford. Glover, I think, has a lot more potential. Even though he looked rough, you got to remember he came out of Georgia State and he was a seventh round pick. Not all of them can be a Rasheed Walker and step in and play decent right off the bat.
Well, and Rashid
But he's
didn't
got
play as a rookie either, so
right.
yeah.
And then for let's see, guard Donovan Jennings, who they were really high on because they gave a pretty high signing bonus for. Marquise Hayes, I don't really know much about him. He's a second year man out of Oklahoma. But and then Monk, and then they brought in Trey Hill as a futures contract. Monk is interesting. He looks like he could play. Well, they have him listed as both a center or guard, but I think he dealt with injuries a lot last year, so that's why we really didn't see him much. And so there are pieces there, but how reliable are those pieces? I really don't think they're going to draft anybody high. I think it's going to be some late round guys when it comes to the O line. So free agency, maybe do like you said, a Dillard pick, which could be that James Daniels or Radins or something like that. That because they're going to need a swing tackle, and Dillard definitely was not the swing tackle that they needed. I'm not sure what the love they had for him was, but I guess that's why they get paid the millions of dollars and we get paid nothing.
I think with Dillard, there was just no one else left, and it's a guy that I know he hadn't played well at tackle, but he at least had played tackle in the NFL, and
Right.
I think that was their. I don't want to say their justification, but they're like, he might not be really good at it, but at least he's not going to be shell shocked and deer in the headlights if we have to throw him out at tackle in a game, which is kind of what happened to Glover and Telford at times when they had to come in and play guard in regular season spots or in the playoffs after like Jenkins got hurt and stuff like that. So one name I will throw out there, this is like I have no idea what the situation is or where the player and the team are. But one name that I would keep an eye on is Jedrick Wills, the former like top 10 pick of the Browns. He's had a lot of injuries the last two. I think he's been injured two of the last 2 years or two of the last three or maybe the last 3 years, but super talented kid. At times has looked really good when he's been on the field, but just hasn't been able to stay on the field. And just like the Eagles signed Mekhi Becton off the street, after the Jets basically gave up on him, Wells would be one that, if he made it to the open market, like I said, I have no idea where the Browns are with him or if he, like I said with Myers, if it's like for him, he's like, it's time for me to find a fresh start, and like just get clean air, and just a fresh start somewhere else. Maybe it could be that kind of position for a guy like Wells too. But yeah, I'm with you. We've talked about it on other episodes when we're talking about why the Packers would go with a certain position here, there, and with regards to drafting O line early, and most of it is because some split of they've got a lot of guys they like on the roster, and like you've pointed out, there aren't many names that will probably be there at 23 that you're like, that's a guy we've got to have. And I know Shavink, you and I talked about it when we had him on for D line, where it's like, this is not the year to be taking a Jordan Morgan type player on O line in the first round, where you're like, we don't know where this guy's going to end up, but he's really talented and we're going to find it out in 2 years, kind of thing. My thinking is if they take an O line in the first round, that guy's got to start right away. And to me, that means that that's a left tackle or a center. And I don't see those guys at either position. That at center, it's like, is that guy going to be that, is that guy that good of a prospect that it's, the deadly, is he worth a first round pick? And then with the left tackle, there's a couple guys that I'm sure we'll talk about in a sec, but you kind of mentioned how they all have these warts on their game that it's like, okay, like, and I was on Derailed with Shavink and Mafi last week, and the thing, the analogy we kept coming up was like, I shouldn't have to squint that hard when I when Green Bay makes a pick to be like, that's an NFL player. As much as I wasn't a fan of the Morgan pick last year, at least the thing I was squinting about was, I don't think he's an NFL tackle, but I'm like, okay, he's an NFL starting lineman. I just don't know where, and that was the consternation over the pick when we were
And
kind of like,
that was the whole thing with me. People would
right,
keep asking me, "What do you think of the pick?" And it's like, "Where does he play?"
right, and that was something that Shavink and I were talking about on Derailed a bunch. Is like, I don't want to go 2 years in a row where we're like, they have to like shuffle the deck chairs to figure out where these two guys' futures is at, kind of thing. Like, you don't want to spend 2 first-round picks in a row on that kind of lineman where it's like, oh, we don't know where they're going to end up, but they're good players. And then as like with the Packers' luck, it's going to be, oh shoot, they play the same position, and that would be so right up the Packers' creek. But
Well, and that's like when people have a fit about the Lucas Van Ness pick or the Rashawn Gary pick. At least we knew what they were going to play them at.
and you're
Yes,
going
they
to
were
play
freak
multiple edge
athletes.
rushers at a time, like that.
Yeah, they're freak athletes and they can fit all over the place, but we knew exactly where they were going to play at. Jordan Morgan, all we knew was he was a freak athlete that we had no idea where he was going to go. At that point, we had Rasheed Walker playing out of his mind on left tackle, and he could have collapsed at any time. There's no doubt about it. We didn't fully know what Rasheed was at that time. You had Elton, who was not going to be moved for nothing unless it was because there was an injury. You had Myers, who, yeah, but at the time, Jordan Morgan, was he going to play center? He'd never played the interior line in his whole life, so that was going to be an interesting concept. Then you had oh shit, I'm blanking on the right guard.
Sean
Ryan,
Ryan.
who was going to be the question mark. So okay, well maybe he slots in there. But then Sean Ryan started playing out of his mind, and we had Zach Tom at right tackle, who nobody was going to replace him unless there was an injury. So the whole thing is I agree with you. There's no way that they can justify taking another offensive lineman in the first round that has no place to play. Whereas if they take like an edge rusher, we know where he's going to play and why they're taking him. Whereas the offensive line is, you're going to pay 4 years for a backup. You're going to pay first round money for 4 years of a backup. That doesn't really sound smart to me. I'm going to think that they got a little too much into like the old fashions and shit like that. That they were seeing things with beer goggles and they meant to take number 4 off their big board and they said 3 or some shit like that. But I suppose, should we start talking about some of the ones that we've watched?
Yeah. So who's okay, do you even want to bother talking about like a membo who like shouldn't be there at 23, or are you want to
The
focus
whole
more on
thing
guy?
that I've been doing is I haven't been looking at anybody that is probably not gonna be there.
Okay,
The one
sounds
guy
good.
that I looked at that's been talked about as possibly a first rounder, Jake had mentioned his name, and I think there was somebody else that mentions his name, was the kid from Ohio State, that Josh Simmons. And maybe he ends up at 23, but
And the
even if he
wart
does.
and the wart there is I don't know when he's gonna play this year because so they saying right now that there was sort of like a not a disconnect, but there was just a lack of information about what his injury was, and there was sort of a debate whether it was like his I believe his patellar tendon, his quad or patellar tendon, or if it was an ACL. And then the last I saw, I think it was his patellar tendon, which I've seen
That's not
differing
good.
opinions. Yeah, I've seen differing opinions of like how likely it is to, how good he'll come back from that. The latest I've seen is it's more promising, but that's his wart. Otherwise, I don't know if he'd be there at 23 if he was fully healthy, because it's
And if
one of
he's
those.
not fully healthy, do you take the risk of taking him at 23?
Right. And so that's one of those medicals we'll need to check out. But Simmons is one of those guys where the recent transfer system in college football helped him so much, because he was like buried on San Diego State's roster. And somehow Ohio State was like, we want that guy to come play for us 2 years ago. And he honestly made himself millions of dollars because he came through, proved to be a really good pass protector. He's not Bach, but he's in that sort of mold where right now he's not the most physical run blocker, but he has solid technique in solid hand technique as a pass blocker, moves really agilely for a guy his size. Gonna have to figure out how well that matches up after his operation and rehab, but he is in my short bin of guys that I'm like, okay, I can see it. I would twitch a little bit because I'm like, I'm hoping that means the knee's okay, but also it's like you, I'm it's not the same, but I'll always have Justin Harrell syndrome where it's like we took a guy who was hurt his last year and he was always hurt in in the NFL. So
And
yeah,
I would be more comfortable if it was just an ACL, but if they're saying it's a patellar, that's your kneecap. That's the muscle that goes kneecap.
yeah.
And it because when I had my ACL surgery, that's the piece that they took to create my ACL.
Oh no.
So, when they explained it to when the surgeon explained it to me, there's three surgeries that they can do for an ACL, and this was at the time. You got to remember, this was 2003, 2004. They could have changed it, but there was three possible ways for an ACL. One is the one that they did on me, which is the patellar. They just slice a piece of the patellar off, string it back, and that's your ACL. The second one is part of your hamstring, and the last one is a cadaver. And you can only do the cadaver so often before you're screwed. So, and then obviously the other two you can only do so often or you're screwed. So the patellar is what keeps your kneecap in place. So if you've screwed that up, you're going to have issues for a while. And it just so I would be more comfortable if they would just come out and say it's a ACL. Then I
No,
could say,
yeah, and I
okay.
was just looking it up. They basically confirmed it was a torn patellar tendon. Yeah, so I think it was Pelissero or something. He was putting out that like, yeah, basically the combine confirmed it was a patellar. So it was the Oregon game, which let's see, when was that game? I think it was okay. So that was October. So I, I don't know what the track record for patellar tendon recovery is, but you know, if it's the same time, it was October 12th of last year that game happened. So if you go with just like a very loose 1 year, that puts him back around like week 6. So you keep him on pup kind of thing. But then at that point, it's like, okay, he hasn't done any of the training camp. He hasn't participated in preseason. He's conditioning is just like whatever the rehab is kind of thing. So, he's not in football hitting shape and stuff. So,
And that's if there's no
right.
steps back.
Yeah.
There's no
So,
setbacks on it.
and so, like I said, all of these guys have warts. Simmons' wart is, when will he be able to play for you? And like I said, if Green Bay has a plan, whether it's Monk at center, whether it's moving Brian or Elton over to center, I don't think it's Tom, because they don't have another tackle on the roster. Like,
Unless
that's
they
the part.
believe in Morgan as right tackle.
And I need to see him
And
play. Yeah,
the only hope that I have for it is they view him like a Brian Bulaga.
right.
Bulaga was the left tackle that, quote unquote, had the short arms, and he slotted in at right. They were going to try him at guard, and it didn't work out, so they slotted him as tackle, and it went. Obviously, we know how that went for him. So that's the only thing that I can hope for, is that if they're going to move Tom to center, then they're damn sure that Morgan's going to be able to hold up as a right tackle.
Yeah. So, yeah. But so the injury is the big concern. But on the flip side of it, like I said, the football player side of it, I don't have that many concerns. If he's going to be healthy, this is a guy that you can expect a high level of play, by the time he really gets his feet wet in the NFL. So there's that side of it. Another guy that I've seen is Kelvin Banks. And my problem with him, so I'll loop these two together. Two guys that I've seen as potential loose picks are Kelvin Banks Jr., the tackle from Texas, and Josh Connerly Jr. from Oregon. And the reason I lump these two together is both guys have technique flaws, but to me, Connerly is the one that, even though he's, consensus not ranked as highly as Banks is, he's the one I would bank on, and it feels more like a Packers pick than Banks is, because Banks' issue is his footwork, and he has sloppy footwork and relies on like his size and his strength to recover from it. Whereas Connerly hits his hand placement. That's the problem. And I know some people will say oh, but that sounds like a bigger deal. That was Rasheed Walker's profile coming out of college. Is like, he's this really good athlete, but he needed a lot of work with his hand placement, his hand punch targeting, and all that kind of stuff. Connerly
That's
is,
another thing that I've seen a lot of these college guys do, and I call it the bear hug. They don't shoot upwards into the guy's chest. They want to swing their arms out and grab the shoulders.
and I do wonder how much of it is that Buck and Bulaga were really good at it at the NFL level. But the thing that was different for them is they were like one hand stabbing, and then the second arm would come after. It's not like you said. It's not like it's not like a garbage truck clamp where they come at the arms come at the same time kind of thing. And so, but in my opinion, and I'll get yours right after this, I would bet on Connerly over Banks, because at least you see the movement skills with his footwork that you can, you have Walker for one more year. If Connerly can't get it within training camp, you have time to work it up, just like you did with Walker, who was only a Yee 7th round pick. But the talent, when you see him, the like 20% of the time his technique is on, he just stones people and takes them out of plays. And it's like, if I can get that 85, 90, 95% of the time, I've got an all-pro player at left tackle. Whereas with Banks, and you saw this against Ohio State in their the national the semifinal game, where the two top Ohio State edge rushers, they're not good pass rushers, but what they are is like high effort, high motor guys. And when you're a guy like Banks, who doesn't have good footwork, doesn't have good technique on the top of that, those kind of high motor, high effort guys can take advantage of your flaws, because even as much as you're like he's not quitting on it, but as much as you're trying to make up for it, they're by you already kind of thing. And the NFL, it only gets faster and more, and more immediate in terms of how quickly you can lose a battle at the line of scrimmage. So and like I said, these are low percentage happen for Green Bay because I just don't think any of these players are guys they're comfortable taking unless the board just falls in the weirdest way. But
Kobe doesn't like your opinion.
that's an often repeated phrase. But of those two guys, I would take Connerly first. But did you get to watch a lot of those two guys?
Honestly, I struggled watching any kind of the offensive line guys just because it's been the same struggle that I've had with a lot of other positions. Trying to find the actual tape for them was kind of hard. And the one thing that I absolutely hate doing is trying to watch tape from like 2 years ago because that's not the same player that you get. You know, what they were in 2023 is not what they are in 2024. Are they similar? Yeah, but it's not the same thing. So they're either super good in 2023 and suck in 2024, or they're going to be super bad in 2023 and they've grown in 2024. So really struggled trying to find tape for a lot of these guys because it was like, oh yeah, I want to watch this guy, and then I'd go look in my sources and they had 2022 tape. Well, I don't fucking want to watch them when they're a sophomore and don't know what they're doing. I want to watch them now when they know they're putting things together. So I really struggle with that. Now I laugh at your how you had your two ranked with Banks and Connerly because the site that I use, this NFL Draft Buzz, has Banks obviously at number one, but they have Connerly down at number seven, and they have like five other guys in ahead of Connerly, and one of them that they have ahead of them, I did watch some on, and that's Gray Zabel from NDSU. And I will be honest, in my notes, I said that you can see that he's athletic, but he's very raw. Because there were times where it's like, well, what the hell are you doing there, man? And 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 that's like I said, made the comment earlier. You're seeing a lot of these kids do that damn bear hug where they want to swing their arms out and clamp onto the shoulders instead of shooting up into the guy's chest and going from there. So I watched Zabel. I said he had good speed and good lateral movement, and I said he looked more athletic and he struggled against speed rushers. So I don't know if that's maybe footwork he needs to work on a little bit or what, but it just seemed like if a guy put a speed move on him, he kind of like you said would give up on him. It's like, well, he's already beat everything that I have, so ole and go from there. Uh then I wish we had Joey on this week because their number 4 prospect is Armand Mimbu out of Missouri, which I think if the Packers would draft him, it would be for guard position because his size is definitely outside their thresholds. So I did watch Texas's line, not for uh Banks, but there's another guy from the Texas line that I was watching. So I did see some of Banks, and Texas had a heck of a line this year. I mean, you could see that when they were playing as a cohesive unit, they were very good. But when one guy struggled, it just seemed like it threw off the balance of everything. So the guy I watched from Texas, and I have to laugh, I was starting to enjoy watching this guy from Texas. And then when I went to look him up to see if he went through the combine just to see what his stats and that or his testing numbers were, they had him as like a maybe backup, and they had him ranked real low. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? They called him unathletic and all that stuff. And it's Hayden Connor, the OG out of Texas. And I was like, man, that's like old school guard. He was a stocky guy. He moved around real well. I did say he was probably a pure guard. I don't think there's going to be much to him where he's going to be able to move out to tackle. So I don't know if that would keep the Packers away from him because he's not the versatile guy that could play, multiple positions. I think he's going to be guard, and that's all he's going to be. He had good hand usage. Strength looked good. The only thing that I said about him was I wish he stayed in a block a little bit longer. it seemed like he would like block for a second, throw off, and then look for somebody else. Well, you can't do that when your quarterback's still got the ball in his hands. You got to stay on that block.
And I do think that kind of goes to your like, it's hard to watch O line film these days because so many college teams run spread or like run and shoot concepts where the ball is supposed to come out in under like a couple seconds, kind of like it's one read, and
Yeah,
everything is pre-snap determined by alignment, motion, all that kind of stuff. So that's why they kind of joke that like quarterbacks can't make reads anymore because everyone's calling the plays for them, and then everything is set up like before the snap, so there's no like progressions or anything like that. And it's kind of same for O-line because, and just thank God they don't all cut block all the time anymore, because I remember
yeah,
there was a point
yeah,
where like all the top like prospects would do is like, it's like, well shit, like all he does is cut block in the 80% of the time, and he's
yeah.
never
There's
in
one prospect on here that I said I wish he would stay on his feet more.
but yeah, it, like I said, if it sounds like we have issues with this O-line class, we kind of do, in the sense that we it's
There's
gonna
not pure
take,
prospects. It's like
yeah.
I've been saying week in and week out. There's not that one guy that just, wow, that guy is going to be a star. Like last year there was guys like the kid from BYU that ended up with the Bears. That was I can't think I can think
Or
of
with
his
the
name, but I
Chiefs,
can't pronounce it.
with the Chiefs, he ended up with the Chiefs. Yeah,
Was it the Chiefs that
yeah. Oh no,
Amaju
that was,
or
he was the
whatever?
Yale kid, Amagaji.
Okay, yeah,
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 he ended up with the
yeah.
Bears. Yeah,
So, there were, or the guy that ended up with the Chiefs from BYU, those were guys that I can see it in him. He's really popping on this film. There wasn't that with a lot of these guys that I did watch. It just, okay, well, they're doing their job, but they're also doing their job against guys that aren't, professional grade talent. And I shouldn't say that because, even to play in college football, you're still a small percentage of kids that ever play football. Now, the one thing that I have to say about Hayden Connor was the two games that I watched. The one was against Michigan, and you know as well as anybody that Michigan had a hell of a defensive line, and that was one of his best games. And so it's just like, okay, so when I see what's the guy that does the NFL stuff, Zerline, that's always putting his write ups over there. So, well, he's unathletic and he can't do this. Are you kidding me? One of the best defensive lines in the whole friggin' country, and that's one of his best games. You're telling me that shows that he's unathletic and probably isn't going to be a solid prospect in the NFL? I mean, am I that dumb?
I think what helped Connors in that is like you kind of pointed to, is that line dealt with injuries this season, and the Texas Michigan game was like the second game of the season, so they were all healthy at that point, and I didn't think he was like that bad of an athlete. I don't think he's an elite athlete for a guard or anything like that. But yeah, I pretty sure he was one of the guys that was dealing with like a bunch of different nagging injuries throughout the season. So to each their own. I do feel like we kind of alluded to, the Packers are looking for guard and or not, are looking for tackle and center. If they're gonna get a guard, I do think it would be more from, excuse me, the free agent side, because they'd want just someone
And
who's
see,
got steps. Yeah,
actually, I'm on the reverse. I think if they're going to do a tackle, it's going to be somebody in free agency that they know can play the swing tackle. And because look at the guards that they have, they're pretty set at guard. So if they bring in a center, then it's going to be Elton and Ryan. Or if they move Elton to center, then it's going to be Morgan or Ryan. But there's no depth there. Glover, as we talked about, is not a guard. He's going to be more of your tackle type depth. I was looking at it. Telford is a free agent according to the list that I was looking at. So he will be not, unless they re-sign him. He's not going to be there, even though they like him. Uh, so unless he was an exclusive rights or something. But the list I got
He
from
should be. He
Track,
should be a exclusive rights guy because he only came like 23 was when they signed him to a futures deal, so he should be like really easy to retain if they want him, and that's the big thing. So, and yeah, I don't think I've
but I
seen
mean,
updates
still,
on
he
that yet.
wasn't really a must. I know they liked him, but he was even worse than what Glover was showing at the guard position. So I view it as the Packers are going to be looking more for guard depth than they are anything in the draft. I think they'll reach out for a swing tackle in free agency and go from there. But we could both be wrong. They could be like, oh no, our guys are fine and we don't need nothing.
Yeah.
So
All right. I feel like we're just gonna be pissing in the wind a little bit on this. Shall we do our usual and we'll talk about whatever talent our alma maters have put into this draft class? You want to go first with who Iowa has in this old line class?
well, I always got a couple of them, and I do have a couple other names I'd like to throw out
Okay,
there
go for it.
before I
Go
get
for it.
to them.
Yeah.
The one that I was talking about that I said that needed to stay on his feet more was Chase out of UConn. I said he was quick off the snap. He might be better suited as guard. He did the whole bear hug thing. He played right tackle at UConn, so that's why I said I think he's going to be better suited as a guard. And he just seemed to always be off his feet for some reason. And then the other guy was giving me kind of Bulaga vibes. I think more with his build than anything. And the reason I wrote him down is I busted out laughing watching this. So this is what I got wrote down on him. I said he was good off the snap. He actually did the back pedal, which was or the leg kick, and that was shocking because like Mike and I were talking beforehand, it was few and far between that you saw people actually do the leg kick when watching this stuff. But I thought he was a little bit stiff in it, so that could be something to be worked on. I thought he was a better run blocker than a blocker. He struggled with the pass off, and what I mean by struggle with the pass off is he would chip a guy, and then he struggled to go off to his actual assignment. So that might be something to work on. But the thing that made me the laugh out of him was, and I can't think of what I think it was the oh god, it was one of the bigger games because they got absolutely decimated. Purdue absolutely got decimated that game. The edge was coming off, and it looked like he was going to beat him. But all of a sudden, you just see this big bear paw come out and slap him in the back of the shoulder pads and knocked him clear off his feet. And so I wrote down in my notes, what a slap. Well, I continued to watch the game, and he did it two more times. The edge guy would come around, and he would just swat him in the back of the shoulder pads and just stumble the guy. And it was so hilarious that I could not go without bringing this guy up because it had me laughing watching this. So Iowa does have two guys coming out that I know. I think even possibly three, but I know two for sure. One is Rickman, I think, the left tackle, and the other is Connor Colby. Rickman, I think Rickman is going to end up being one of those.
If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Granger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Granger for professional grade products and next day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRANGER, click Granger.com, or just stop by. Granger, for the ones who get it done.
That is probably going to end up as a late round draft pick, probably preferred UDFA just to see what he does. He held up well. I think he was probably one of the better offensive linemen that Iowa put out this year. But I don't know how well he's going to I don't know how well his ability is going to transfer to the pros. Now, Colby is another one that is going to be probably a pure guard. A good hand placement, good off the snap. Maybe needed to work on his footwork a little bit, and he did struggle a little bit with power. So if somebody put a power move on him, he struggled with holding holding ground on that guy. I have to say the last few years they have really pumped out lackluster prospects from the Iowa offensive line, which sucks because it seemed like for years we had first rounders constantly. And I just this is again lackluster. I think there's going to be some guys coming out next year that are going to have a better shot at it. Do I want the Packers to grab them? Well, yeah, I'd have an all Iowa draft if I could, but I don't know what round they're going to feel comfortable in, and I don't think the guys coming out are going to have the versatility that Green Bay is going to that normally wants in their offensive line draft picks.
Yeah, so excuse me. It's yeah, it has been down for Iowa for O line, and it feels weird to say that because as much as everyone talks about like Wisconsin, I felt like our schools, Michigan and Iowa, have both been in that realm of like they're always putting out talent, and it has been weird to see Iowa struggle to put good O line talent into the. Basically, it's kind of been that way since like Wirfs and Linderbaum went to the NFL, and then it's kind of just tailed off after that pretty bad. But
It's all after he let his kid in be in charge with the friggin' recruitment. And now I'm glad that San Jose State or whatever college school has got him because he can screw them up. We're still feeling the effects of it. And I know it's a joke, but it's really true. Kirk let Brian do all the recruitment. He was in charge of the recruiting, and you can tell. And because a lot of the guys that he brought in just didn't fit the Iowa system, they really struggled with it, and offensive line is especially. Kirk, for as much as I give him shit for being just an average coach, is a hell of an offensive line coach. He's one of the best ever, and that's not just Iowa bias. That's
no,
because
like I
like
said,
we were just talking.
when the faucet
Iowa
is just on for O line prospects, and you can list up, there have been some really good ones that have come through the NFL, and like I said, the way the faucet has just turned off the last few years, it's surprising.
and so hopefully now that Brian is out of there, Kirk can get back into it. And the one kid that I was hoping would be a potential prospect coming out this year, and I think had he went to Iowa, he probably would have been more than Alabama. But now the kid can go fucking rot in Alabama for all I care, is Caden Proctor. He was a 5-star coming out of high school, and he was supposed to be that next great Iowa lineman. And now he's just a drop of water in Alabama. And that's nothing against Alabama, but when you know you're almost guaranteed to be a top 2 round draft pick from Iowa, or you just become another one of the numbers at Alabama, something's a little off here. So whatever, more power to him. That's the only knock I have about the NIL and the transfer portal is allowing guys to jump around like that. But until they get something figured out, I don't know. But yeah, Iowa just has not been producing.
Yeah, so and on the Michigan side of things, we only really have one NFL prospect this year. Excuse me, and that's Miles Hinton, and he would probably go later in the draft if Green Bay were to take. Well, he probably is going later in the draft because he played on the championship team last year, but he was more of like a spot. Like he played the six lineman role, was a spot starter. He's he's a little outside of the thresholds, but in the like big way, as opposed to like the being short armed. And so he measures up in terms of his arm length and hand size. He's got 34 and an eighth inch arms, 10 and a quarter inch hands. So those two measurements Green Bay really likes. He actually weighed in less than I thought he would. They had him at 323 at the combine, but he is 6'7", and Green Bay hasn't picked a lineman that's 6'7" before round like 6 or maybe 5 and the times that I've really been tracking it. So I am curious if they'll take him, but he would fit that role of like he comes in, he's a swing tackle, he's a guy you can put out there if you go like an extra lineman heavy kind of thing and stuff. And he has some developmental upside. His technique needs work, but the he comes from that mold of lineman where he's a big dude and he knows he's a big dude. And when his technique gives a little bit, he does just use the fact that he is, a city block big to be like, okay, like I've screwed up my footwork or my hand placement, but he still has to run around me kind of thing and stuff. So he knows that his size is his asset and he uses it to his advantage. Same thing like you said, I don't know where exactly he would fit in with how Green Bay kind of likes a certain template for their old linemen, but would be pretty thrilled if Green Bay picked him because I do think, like I said, I do think he has some upside as a pro. Otherwise, we could keep kicking rocks on this class. But Joe, you got anyone else you want to go over for this one, or you want to put a bow on it today already at this point?
I think we can wrap it up because if the Packers take somebody, I really don't see it before like the third round.
Yeah.
And even then it's like, okay, well, I think they're only going to take this guy as maybe it's a diamond in the rough type deal. So yeah, I mean, I tried to look for my normal small school guys, and I got as far as the kid from William and Mary, and that's about all.
And that would be
I
your
do
like
know
Amagaji equivalent player kind of thing and
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
the Packers did talk to a kid. Uh, it's a me, Mario. uh, Logan Brown from Kansas. And now I did get to watch a little bit of him, and he seemed solid, but he was a right tackle. So again, I don't know if he's got the versatility there to be able to play both ends of it. But he seemed like an old school style right tackle where, he played to the whistle and he had the movement and the speed and he looked more athletic. Now I don't know what he did at the combine, so I couldn't tell you if he completely bombed it or if he even was there. So yeah, other than that, I struggled watching any offensive line. And like you said earlier, we struggled to get a guest for the show because nobody wanted to talk about it.
Up for next week. Next week we do have. Oh, sorry. Circling back to Logan Brown, he actually had a decent combine. He was there, and he comes up. He came up. He didn't do the agility drills, but for the speed, size, and explosion composite, he has a 944 RAS. So kind of makes sense why he. And then in terms of arm length, he's like 33 and 7/8. So tackle doable for how the Packers like their guys to measure out and stuff. So kind of makes sense why they would talk to.
Oh no, he we were so close. Hang on, let's see if he comes back. Come back. We were so close.
No, that wasn't the internet. I got punchy with the buttons. I was closing the wrong tab. Not technical difficulties, human difficulties. But what else do you hope? But as I was alluding to, unlike this week where you had to hear the two of us try and find positive things to spin this O-line class with, next week we'll have Dusty Evely on to talk tight ends, and that should be
We've got a big slate of guys, or a big slate the next 3 weeks.
Yep. So we've got Dusty talking tight ends. That should be a lot more energetic episode. I feel like more upbeat in terms of the outlook of what Green Bay could possibly get out of this class. But
And tight end can be a sneaky need.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we've got Tucker and Musgrave and that, but if Musgrave doesn't continue, that could be a sneaky need.
Yeah, I think honestly they should be looking into it. I haven't given up on Musgrave, but the track record coming out of college was he couldn't stay healthy, and granted the 2 injuries he's had as a pro are
Been freak ass
really
injuries.
freaky fluky injuries, but you can't discount that that's been unfortunately his thing, other than all the Bambi jokes and stuff like that. But when he's been out there, and healthy, his impact has been noticeable. But unfortunately, for everyone talking about Jair and all that kind of stuff, it's a similar thing where he's only been out there like a third of the games that he's been a pro. So it like you said, it's a sneaky need, but one where depending on how the board falls, you could see like, I don't know if he'll be there, but Warren from Penn State or Loveland from Michigan, those two guys could be in play at 23, especially if there isn't a receiver that they really like. They could go like inside out. But we'll save that for our
Michigan guy without throwing the Iowa guy out there. I see how it is.
But we'll save more of that for Dusty when he joins us next week. Want to thank you for joining us on the Ohana Packers Edition podcast. Please check out our website, ohanapackers.org. We're still, Carlos has been bumping a lot of articles this offseason. He's putting in overtime. I know he'll have reactions for all of the stuff that came out today. He's doing a lot of pre-draft articles as well. So check us out there. Check out our merch. Please support us. Help fund Joe's trip to the draft this year. So purchase all the merch, all the coffee you can have out of OPE. Please follow us on your social medias at Ohana_Packers on Twitter, at Ohana Packers Edition on Instagram, and just search us on Facebook.
Blue Sky, it's just me.
Oh, yeah.
Because I haven't created one over there yet.
We haven't. There's not enough people over there for us to justify having another social media account.
Well, I don't think it's that. It's just I haven't been active.
No. Don't say that. Don't say shh. I'm covering for you, Joe.
No, I fully admit I struggle with the social media stuff. So, yeah. If anybody wants to do social media, please contact me at outbackpackers1919@gmail.com, and you can come do the social media for us.
Please follow the podcast on your favorite podcasting apps. Give us a like and a subscribe if you're enjoying what you're hearing, and give us all of your comments. We want to continue making the content you're looking for. Like I said, that puts a wrap on our wrap on this O-line class. To put it undelicately, we don't want to see one taken before day 3 out of this draft class unless funky things happen in terms of guys sliding down the board.
I will run up on the stage and protest if it happens.
Iowa man arrested at Lambeau.
So maybe we're not funding my trip, we're funding my bail.
No. But that's Iowa Joe. I'm Mike. We say all the time, go Pack, go, and aloha.
Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for the up. Let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for you know who.